Welcome to the Manhood Podcast. I'm Bob Mann, your host. Manhood, provider, protector, procreator, promise keeper. Here talking with Joseph Thomas today and hear his story of manhood and growing up with his father in and out of his life. He chose the music today. And I want to read you some of the lyrics by Lupe Fiasco. You see what my problem is, that I don't know where my papa is. No positive role model to play football and build railroad models. It's making a hole you've been digging in, because you ain't been kicking in. Since I was old enough to hold bottles, wasn't supposed to get introduced to that. I don't deserve to get used to that. Now I ain't asking you for money or to come back to me. Some days it ain't sunny, but it ain't so hard. Just breaks my heart when my mama try to provide and I tell her that ain't your job. To be a man, she try to make me understand that she my number one fan, but it's like you born from the stands. You know the world is out to get me. Why don't you give me a chance? Joe, you chose this song. What is it about this song that made you want to use it for your interview?
This song for me is something that spoke to me at both different points in my life, both as a father and before I was a father. You know, in the lens of growing up before I was a dad, you know, I heard that song, and one of the few lines that spoke to me was, it's like you're booing from the stands, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought about that because of how many times playing sports in high school, elementary school, you know, I kind of long for my father to be there. Not always on the surface of my mind, sometimes subconsciously, but hearing that word, those lyrics in that song brought it back to me. And then on the other side, as a father, one of the things that this song that has always stayed with me was I didn't deserve to get used to that. And what that meant for me was looking into my baby boys, now my baby girl's eyes, and thinking about the things that we give them, that we impart to them, and what they get used to, right? I tell my players that I coach and my sons, you know, you get good at what you practice. And yes, that sounds like practice makes perfect, but for me, it's different, right? Because that's anything. If you're lying, if you're leaving, if you're not showing up for your kids, if you're cussing in front of your children, you're hitting, like anything you do consistently, you will build a habit.
Yeah.
You get good at what you practice.
Right.
And for me, that lyric of, you know, I don't deserve to get used to that said, what do your children deserve from you?
Right.
And if nothing else, they deserve your love. And if you're giving them that love, or if you the lack thereof, rather, that's not what you want to give to them.
Right.
And that's what that kind of means. So that song has encouraged me. It's brought me to tears over the years. And, you know, I love Lupe, J. Cole, some of these artists that really make music that's not just about, you know, material things, but touches the soul in a way that it makes you stop and think about what you're putting out there in the universe.
Okay. Give us a little bit of a background. You talk about, you know, your mother providing and so forth, and, you know, your father not being there to cheer you in the stands. What is that history? Where was he? How long was he there, if he was there?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, in the hood, south side, south side of Chicago. And one of the things that, you know, I learned at an early age, growing up in Chicago in the 90s, you saw a lot of basketball. You love sports. What you also saw from time to time was not a lot of dads there. You know, my father, you know, lived in the city where I was, but, you know, chose to live a life that my mom didn't necessarily agree with. And over the years, their relationship kind of broke. And, you know, as a result, our relationship broke. But the one thing that I think I differ from some people, not all, I know there's a lot of people in my boat as well, is that I was relieved when my father wasn't around. My father was someone that was really, and what's really crazy, I was listening to, and we'll talk about this later, the book, but my grandfather, from my knowledge, was a very tough, old school guy, you know, especially on his sons. And I think that my belief is that he imparted that into my father. And my father did not know how to engage with his son in a loving manner. He knew discipline and you better do as I say. And so for me, my dad, the last time I saw my father I was probably 12 years old and on a court supervised visit. Before that, I maybe was 8. And, you know, his absence in my mind was a gift to me because he taught me what it means to be a father by not being there. I pulled from a lot of sources in my life,
Right.
but in that aspect, my father not being there, it excited me about fatherhood from a very early age.
Wow,
7th,
okay.
8th grade is when I started thinking, man, when I have my sons, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to take them here. I'm
Okay.
going to take them to Disney World. I'm going to do all these things. And I fantasized about it for many years. And, you know, it wasn't about the difficulties of fatherhood that I soon would learn, but it was about the joys of it. And I could not understand.
So with your dad not being there, is there anything you felt like you missed? Because you hit on something that's, whether we want to or not, we pass on things as fathers to our children, good and bad.
Absolutely.
You know, their physical appearance, their temperament and so forth. He passed on the discipline that he learned from his father, and it may have been there's a line when you cross from discipline into abuse.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like your grandfather crossed that line, and then all your father knew was, this is how I was raised, this is how I'm gonna raise you, to the point where you were relieved when he was no longer there. You don't often hear that, but you know, in the song it talks about maybe, you know, being smart in school but not doing well.
Yeah.
Because of that. Was there any way that you kind of acted out to get attention when he wasn't there?
So for me, I was I know now I was a very deep thinker as a child.
Still are.
Yeah. And so I don't think I acted out, but I felt his absence in things like, I remember one time in particular, my mother was taking me to baseball, you know, baseball trials in Washington Park in Chicago on the South Side, and she couldn't find the diamond. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I wish my father was here, because I just felt an inert feeling that he would be able to take us here, not because of who he was, but because of the role to me that he should have been as a father.
Right.
And so there was a lot of times in life where I felt like, even just financially, you know, things would have been a little easier, you know, just a little bit. You know, at times my mom was going through whatever, even if she didn't have the time to explain a complex emotion to me. If he could have been there to step in and say, hey, this is what you're going through. This is what you're feeling. And one particular, last thing I'll say about that was that for years I struggled. So I felt like I was, just as say it is, you know what it is, I felt like I was too soft as a kid. Like I wasn't tough enough. And I felt like I didn't have my dad to sit me down and say, let me teach you how to fight. Let me teach you how to box. And so I felt like my mom, as mothers do, taught nurturing. They were nurturing, they were loving, and things of that nature. But when I got into the real world, it wasn't, she couldn't protect me from that, which my mother tried to do. And I felt like my father may have better prepared me to deal with the South Side of Chicago.
So when we talk about being a provider, most people think of money. It's not just money.
Not at all.
It's providing you with the wherewithal, the mindset to be that fighter, to be tougher and everything. So you bring up a good point. Joseph is the husband of my play niece, who I love dearly. I know his father-in-law very, very well. We were at a baby shower, his youngest child's baby shower, and his oldest son came over to him and said, Dad, can I have another piece of cake? And I heard Joseph say to him, how does that fit into your goals? I was blown away. I was like, whoa, I've never heard a father say that to their son. Usually it's a yes or no, and you don't need any of this. But it was, how does that fit into your goals? I'm like, he is raising men who will think. Tell us about you becoming a father. You have 3 children. Did you expect any of the 3? Did you plan on any of the 3? Tell us your journey into fatherhood.
Absolutely. First, I talk about that moment just real quickly because my oldest son, Harlan, you know, was a little chunky. You know, when the pandemic started, you know, he's since sprouted out like 4 or 5 inches. So he's, you know, skinny and thin as a pole now, but he was struggling with that. And so as I helped try to guide him through that process, we worked out, you know, he doesn't live with me. And so when he was with his mom's house, you know, we're working out virtually. When he's with me, we're working out, you know, physically in person. And so one of the things I told him to do was that you need to watch what you eat. Even now that you're fit, that you're skinny, you know, you're not afraid to take your shirt off and get in the pool. Habits, you get good at what you practice. And so, you know, me asking him that day, would that fit into your goals of trying to stay consistent with basketball and sports? Was a question that we have talked about a number of times. What are your goals and your priorities, and are you taking steps towards them or away from them? And in the same way, we were in Martha's Vineyard this summer, and I got a peanut butter cookie, and he looked at me and said, "Dad, does that fit into your goals?" And I said, "You know what, man? I'm a grown man, but I said, you right there. I'll say this for later." And so, we hold each other accountable.
I love it.
And so, yeah, that's that. But as a father, my first child, Harlan, was my oldest son, was not expected, and that put me into a place of, just to be honest, a little bit of shame, a lot of bit of fear, and at the same time, it kind of birthed a kind of a, I'm not gonna say quickness, but a imperative of now life is getting real. What are you getting ready to do? Right. And so that was something that, for the years before my middle child, Joe, was born, I dealt with a lot of, shame, some fear, a lot of pressure of you got to perform. It almost felt like, this is something else we were talking about too, is mental therapy. Talked to my therapist not too long ago, and I told him for many years I envisioned life as if I was in a boxing ring, and an unexpected pregnancy was you're on the canvas and you're on the 7 count. And I've learned though that while that helped me at that time, that's using fear and pain as a motivator, which is not the best thing to use. Right. But for that period in my life, it was something that I had to harness. For Joe was playing, and the one thing I can say about that process, Joe, we had a little scare when he was born. He didn't come out crying. Everybody's like, "Oh, he's not crying." And my mom was like, "That's not good." You know? But everything worked out for him. But when I held Joe in my arms, I felt a sense of pride that I felt like I could not feel all the time, especially with my oldest son, because of the amount of shame people come. And it's, again, I want to stress that I allow people to make me feel ashamed, make me feel like I messed up, that I didn't do things according to plan. But as everyone who's ever lived life knows, very few things happen according to plan, right? And so, that was that. And then with my baby girl, she was very much a surprise. I thought my wife was messing with me. And she said,
now, how many years between Joseph and the baby, and between Harlan and Joseph?
Harlan's 13. Joseph just turned 9. So we have about 4.5 years between them. And my baby girl, she's 4 months old. And so she's about a good 9-year gap. And so, knocking the rust off in the parenting skills, but especially with a girl, I used to joke with everybody, like, man, I can only make boys, I had a feeling if I ever had a kid again, God was going to be like, listen, man, let me tell you something. You don't make anybody, I do. So here you go. But,
got you straight, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that sounds like, my story. I had two older boys, 10-year gap, and then 2 girls, and the girls are different. I used to tease a friend of mine. You know him from the cathedral. Big tough state trooper, and with the 2 boys. And one day, and I've told this story before on the podcast. His son was in the back of the pickup truck crying, and he just snapped his fingers and said, "Suck it up." And his son said, and sucked it up. Now, when his daughter came along, it was a totally different story, okay? He, cuddling her and cradling her and picking her up and coddling her when something happened, and just the whole thing. And I always talk about his daughter wrapped him around her little finger. This big 6-foot burly, strong man, just ex-military man, state trooper, wrapped around a little finger. So are you wrapped around Corey's finger yet?
People say that, but I'm not going to lie. Even I'm a very logical person, right? I hope that I am. And I told a story recently with my boys. We were on a racetrack, and my youngest son, Joe, drives like Ricky Bobby and Talladega Nights. We've never seen that. Just reckless. I'll hit anybody to get to first place. So he hit my oldest son, who he and I drive. We do a lot of things that we're strategic, So my oldest son's out there trying to race, like he's, racing for real. And Joe was just, rolling through everybody. After the 3rd time, Joe bumped my oldest son, Harlan, I saw the look in Harlan's eyes that I'm going to hit you with this car. So I'm speeding up to get to them. And as soon as I get close, Harlan turns his wheel left, crashes into him. So I'm like, "Stop the race. And I'm like, no, we're going to finish the race in the middle of the track." So we finish it. I grab him, get out the car, get out the race, go-karts, whatever. I yoke them both up, say, "What is wrong with y'all?" I'm going in on like, this is not what we do. We're family. You don't let anger take control of you. Right. And 2 lessons we learned at that point. Number 1, I was angry, telling them not to get angry because I was embarrassed at their behavior. Number 2 was, as a family, We don't let the petty things come between us.
Right.
And now, while I was able to yoke those boys up, had my little girl been 7 or 8 and did the same thing, that would have not happened. And so I just can't imagine myself, I just couldn't, because I don't know if this is what other men, you have daughters say. I don't ever want my daughter to get used to a man in her face in that way. And I know that's a common thing that people say, but I really feel that way. I want her to understand that this is the line you don't cross. And so while it could change, who knows what's going to happen when she's 12 years old telling me off.
You say, oh man. So my oldest daughter, when she was graduating from high school, she wanted to go to Florida during that senior week when they didn't have anything before graduation. Her and her girlfriends were going to go. Needed to get something fixed on her car. They couldn't get it fixed on that Friday. She wanted to leave Saturday, but I was telling her they'll fix it first thing Monday, and then you can leave. She was going to be gone for 7 days anyway. She just would have been gone 2 days less. She decided that one of her girlfriend's mother was going to rent them a car. Now, you're not supposed to rent a car unless you're 25.
Yeah.
They're definitely not 25. 4 young girls driving down to Florida. She came down. I told her she couldn't go. She came downstairs, looked me in my eyes, and said, "I'm leaving. I'm going to Florida. What are you going to do about it?" She knew that it was my policy not to put my hands on my daughters. Had that been my son, he wouldn't have any teeth. But my daughter, she knew, and she took advantage of it. My wife had passed away probably 8 years at that time, 7 or 8 years. If I ever wanted her to come back, it was that night. Right. So she could have just knocked my daughter out. And she knew it, and she took full advantage of it. But I was going to stand up to my principle of never putting my hand on her, because I never want my daughters to get used to a man putting his hands on them. They know that's automatic. Absolutely. Listen, I'm out. Even yelling at them. And you have to treat each of your children differently.
Absolutely.
My 2 girls, one of them I could be more stern with and have to be more stern with than the other. The other one is very responsive to my tone of voice and everything else, and will get sad. I always want to be able to correct them without crushing their spirit. How do you find your 3 children, and you got a baby now, so you might not be able to answer for that one, but with the 2 boys, how are they different?
Man, my oldest son, I haven't had to get quote unquote tough with him since maybe he was 7 years old. He kicked a kid at daycare after I told him he had got sent home from daycare the previous day, or not daycare, summer camp. Sent home the previous day because he had hit a kid or something. And then the next day I said, "Hey, listen, man, I'm going to work. I can't pick you back up. Don't get in trouble." Dropped him off. 10 minutes later, I get a call. Kicked the kid because the kid said ill when he dumped his donut in milk. So, I'm in his face, and we get home and I deal with him. And over the last, he's, like I said, 13 now, I kind of give him a stern talking to, not even a long talking to. Like, man, what's wrong with you? And he feels it. I remember one time he had kicked his brother or something. And, I got in his face a little bit, went in the bathroom for an hour, cried a little bit, wouldn't come out. And that's kind of him. He and I are very similar in the sense that he gets the main point. Like, you need to chill out. He chills out. My youngest son is different. He's the one that straight up looked me in the face and say, he's 9 now. I'm not doing that, Dad. Now, he says it, and then you see the look of, he kind of makes eye contact and wonders what happens next. And so, I've learned that, and this is where you learn about dealing with anger and things like that. And so I've learned, I'm like, okay, that's what you want to say to me.
Right.
But just remember how much of your life is in my hands. I'm not talking about giving you a spanking, but I'm talking about all the things that you enjoy being gone. Now, my wife has tried to implement a gentle parenting strategy. And so when I can, I adopt it. But at the same time with boys, and this is a serious thing I tell a lot of people, is that when you have a child, especially a son that likes to be defiant, you got to stop thinking in the terms of what, he's disrespecting me. And, think about that time when he could be pulled over and the police officer says, "Let me see your hands." And because he's got good at what he's practiced of being defiant, does this. And then what happens after that in America with black men? And so that's what I tell people, is that it's not just about discipline or what he's doing to me. It's about building this adult, because I'm raising not a kid, I'm raising an adult. I'm raising someone to be an adult. And so it's very important that the discipline that I apply to my children fit each other, because they're different. You know?
Right.
One of the things I do with both of them, forehead on the wall, is something I've seen other parents that know it's adopted. I'm like, hey, you getting in trouble, go put your forehead on the wall. It's slightly uncomfortable, and they hate it. I have many pictures of not just my boys, but kids that came to visit our house with their foreheads against the wall, looking very frustrated. You know, I've made them pick up the dog's poop in the backyard. I even threatened them and said, if y'all get in trouble, I'll make you cut the grass with scissors. And so there's a lot of things that I deploy. Like, if you remember, there was an episode of Fresh Prince years ago. I think Will had tricked his, who was it? Can't remember the actress. I think the Regine from Living Single tricked her into marrying him so he could, you know, consummate the marriage that night. Right? And he didn't go through it. But Uncle Phil was going to think of a punishment for him. And he cut back, you know, to a different scene of Uncle Phil reading a book that was like 2 phone books thick of punishments. And he finds out, I found it. And so I tell my kids all the time that I have tons of punishment. I don't have to whoop you. I got tons of things to make you do that you don't want to do. And as I learn what you don't like, those punishments go in my book.
So my kids to this day, all 4 of them will tell you the worst punishment they got was, you know better, or I'm disappointed in you. But in order to get them to that place, you have to praise them when they do well, reward them when they do well, so that when you do say that to them, it means something. They want your adulation. They want to hear you say, well done and good job. So when your boys do well, how do you reward them? What do you do with them?
Man, so one of the things I tell my sons, I will tell my daughter as well, is that you have cool parents that like to do things, right? I like to travel. I like to go out to eat. The life that we live, and they've, you know, had an amazing summer. We were in Ocean City, we were in Martha's Vineyard, we went back to Boston. They had an amazing summer, you know. And I will tell them that the things that we do
at 13 and 9, they did all that this summer.
All this summer.
You did that when you was 13 and 9, right?
When I was 13, I tell everybody the first time I got on the planes when I went to Hampton University at 18. You know,
wow.
So I had one summer vacation. We went to Wisconsin Dells. So they live a life that I, as a child, would have envied. Like, even as an adult, sometimes like, man, you guys, y'all don't realize. But I tell them that those things only come with good behavior. So, for example, you know, my son wanted a pair of Jordans last year. And I said, okay, cool. First period, grades, A's and B's, you got your Jordans. Didn't make that mark. Dad, you can't have no Jordans, man. You got some good, you know, Weather Pro boots if you need them. But no Jordans. And so,
and you hold to it.
Hold to it.
All right. But Mom doesn't sneak and go behind your back.
You got to stick to those things. Now, on the other side of it, when they're doing well, you know, I bought my boys. I said, hey, once y'all reading proficiently, get your game system. Both of them with Dad. I'm like, once you can read, because I'm not going to, for 2 reasons. I'm not going to be down there telling you what button to press because you can't read the screen. Number 2, it doesn't help us as a race. It's counterproductive for you to be able to play a video game better than you can read a book. And so once they were able to read, and not just, you know, sight words, they can fluently read. You got a video game system. You know, say, hey, you know, even a couple of weeks ago, we were. My wife was down in Atlanta. It was just me and the boys at the house. They won. I said, hey guys, let's go out to DC. Let's go to a nice steakhouse. But before we do that, this house needs to be clean. Toilets, floor, everything needs to be perfect. Put in the work. They did it. We're out there having an amazing day. So they like experiences a little more than they like things at this point. And so the experiences that I would give them are all rooted in their, you know, not all the time, to be honest, but when it comes to here's a goal in grades and school and behavior, that's what unlocks those benefits.
I hear goal setting. I hear discipline. I hear there's a bar set for to do creative things, to do fun things that they like. Has that all come from you, or have they picked up and started setting their own goals?
I think, you know, I want to say that there's parts of it that's kind of inert to them, that is their own perspective and things that they want. But I do know that my wife and I, like, a good example was on New Year's this year. I was sitting in the house and I said, you know what, let's do something. So I went out to a real nice restaurant in Baltimore, expensive restaurant, and I said, we're going to go out, eat, and we're going to discuss our goals for this next year. Let's start the new year off correctly, not setting New Year's resolutions, because I don't want to do that stuff anymore. We're setting priorities and goals for our life. And I said, let's go out to this nice restaurant. We're going to bring a pen and pad. We're going to note down what each member of the family has in mind. And things like that I want to do, because I want them to get in the mindset of going to business meetings or business dinner, getting deals, getting things done, getting to a routine of working on themselves outside of a classroom and outside of discipline. And so those are the things that I like to pursue with them. And as a result, I do see tangible results, you know, from that. This summer, I talked about a business for Martha's Vineyard, right?
Yeah.
Didn't do it per se. It was just, I wanted to focus on other stuff. However, my sons really liked the idea. And so they started making necklaces from seashells and doing different things. And I said, okay, look, see your effort so y'all can sell them. But this is also going to make some money. I'm going to get some s'mores. I got these 2 little fire pits. We take them to the beach and see what happens.
Yeah.
They did that, and they made money. People were coming up within the first 5 minutes.
Okay,
and
good,
I saw that.
good.
And I didn't want to do it at first. I didn't feel like, and I didn't know about the legal ramifications and the permits. But I saw that the desire that was in their heart, they're doing it because they were working towards something. Yeah. And they making signs, okay, they're taking it serious. So I went out, got everything on the beach, and they're selling stuff. And they're, excuse me, ma'am, talking proper and engaging with people. Yeah. And I said to myself that was something I didn't feel like doing. But it was so invaluable. It was so valuable, I should say.
Yeah.
It was priceless because of what they got a chance to do. They set up their business. Yeah. They exchanged money. They gave people change. They took cash. They felt what it feels like to have your own business.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think meant a lot to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's so important that whatever your kids are interested in, even if you don't feel like doing it, you foster that in them.
Absolutely.
My girls wanted to play lacrosse, and I've probably told this story before, but I knew nothing about lacrosse. They knew nothing about lacrosse, and I'm going to these games and everything, driving all over the place, and just like, why are we doing this? But they became very good at it. They played varsity lacrosse. I think my oldest daughter played all 4 years. My youngest daughter, because of COVID, got cut short. And then she got hurt 1 year, but they loved it, and it was great for them. It gave them focus on their studies while they were in school because they knew they had to get good grades to stay on the team and everything. You have a unique background. Many people say, oh, I didn't have a good father, so I don't know how to be a good father. You sound like an excellent father with Joseph, who's there in the house. Your oldest, who's outside of the house. I'm hearing you talking about, playing video games with him, keeping him accountable, exercising with him from hundreds of miles away. What advice would you give other fathers on being a good father? And do you think you're a good father?
Yeah, I think I'm an okay father. The reason I say that is I'm just never a person that will think too highly of myself, even though it's something you got to work on and change, But one thing I would give advice is that for me, especially early on, it was challenging, but we know there's so many things in life that are worth having. It's challenging. Yeah. So I think back to the days where I used to, and flights wasn't as cheap back then, and I'm talking, 10 years, 8, 9 years ago. There wasn't a lot of Spirit Frontier flights for $40. So I would buy 3 round trip tickets whenever I went to get my son, me to go out there and come back, and me to take him back, and me to come back to Maryland. And it was hard on many days. It was hard when you didn't have the funds to do it. And it was hard when you just didn't feel like flying that much in one day. Because a lot of it was same day, pick them up, come back. And what I kept hearing in my mind is that, this is for your seed, your child. The advice I would tell a man that's going through this is that, you deal with kind of like people say the 5 stages of grief, right? But when you have a child, especially unexpected, you deal with a lot of fear. Right. How am I going to do this? And you deal with some anger, misplaced anger, because it's no one's fault but your own reality, And it's hard sometimes because even people that's involved in it may not feel that way. But you have to prepare yourself. Right. And it's not something I necessarily did or knew I was doing in the moment, but I had to learn to slow my anger, to slow my reactions, to think. I said when we talked before that, life is a thinking man's game, right? It really does go. It really benefits people to sit down and contemplate things, to think deeply, to write things down, to understand your situation, to both appreciate it, even if it's not as pleasant, but to at least even if you don't appreciate it, I should say, at least you have an understanding of what's going on. And so for me, and I've spoken to young fathers as well that are in different situations. I tell them all the time that you have to control your responses because that little guy, that little girl is looking at you, right? You never want to engage in those typical TV show moments, baby mama type drama stuff, especially in front of your kids.
A lot of people live those moments.
They do.
A lot of people live those moments.
They do.
Yeah.
But you want to limit that in front of your child. I was listening to a book or audio book early actually this morning that said that talked about This particular person throughout history that said that I realized that my child watches the things I do. He watches my footsteps. There's a poem he was kind of reading. He follows me when I go left and he goes right. And I had a quick moment of revelation because I think about how both my sons have seen me get angry and get sad and happy. And one time in particular, I told like a lie, just be honest. We were headed to a restaurant, and this was recently, and we were running late. So we loved the restaurant, and the reservation policy is strict. So I said, oh, hey, my wife got a little sick. We had to pull over, be there. Hung up the phone. Both my sons, Dad, did you just lie? And I was like, what? I'm doing it. We can get to this place. It's like, but you lied. And I'm not joking when I said that they reminded me of this for 6 months straight, off and on. And I said, if y'all are listening that hard to me making mistakes, what are y'all saying when things is good? But I say all that to say is that, the example you set. And the one thing that I wish I could tell myself 10 years ago, 13 years ago was work on yourself. It's okay to feel these feelings of hurt. Forgive yourself and process it. I wish I would have been in therapy. I wish I would have learned the value of building up my character and my person, that my actions are not just to spite someone or to defend against an attack. It's who I am. The power that we give everybody in our world. When we allow them to make us angry, when we allow them to generate to ruminate over feelings and think about, well, this person, she said this or they did this. When we do that, you're practicing. You're getting good at what you practice. You're becoming an angry, bitter person, which is the exact opposite of what you need to do to be a present father. And so work on yourself. Understand there's a book, Destiny or Discipline is Destiny, that by an author named Ryan Holiday that I listened to and read. I'm going to keep doing that because it talks about a lot of important concepts in terms of managing your emotions. And that's something that I think I've seen a lot of guys get hot-headed, and sometimes people will understand. There's a lot of situations we see out there in this world where we understand if a guy's like, man, not putting his hands on a female, but at least mad, or I need to step away from the situation. So we get it. But again, mastering your emotions was going to be just a priceless skill when you're walking in the woods of the unknown.
You make a very good point. More is caught than taught. When your kids see you doing something, they remember, and the good and the bad. And I've said this before. My kids, I drive too fast. My kids drive too fast. That's something I wish they had not caught from me, because it is dangerous. I know it's dangerous. I should have corrected that in me before it got to them. And there are all types of behaviors that we have like that in our lives. We're going to wrap this up a little bit. You talked about forgiving yourself. Yesterday, when we were preparing for this, you talked about fatherhood being difficult. What is it about fatherhood that's difficult, and is it any easier now than it was when your first child was born 13 years ago?
Absolutely. And I'm going to piggyback on what you just said. Children, about the driving, children they inherit our values, our virtues, and our vices as well. And that's something you can't control. And that may be the hard part about it. Looking at my oldest son, Harlan, who's 13 again, he is someone that really mirrors me. Everyone says, like, you guys are really alike. And I'm like, okay, it's dope. What father wouldn't want that, right? But then I think about some of my vices. I'm like, I see some of those things in him. My youngest son, I see more of it, and I'm wondering, how do I cultivate more good and less of the parts I don't like about myself, and that's what makes fatherhood complicated, right? My baby girl, she's a kid, she's an infant, so she just smiles and wants a diaper change and wants food. But as she grows,
with those big eyes,
right, I'm going to be more cognizant of that. Even starting from today moving forward, just really digesting the concept of they inherit our values and our virtues has spoken to me. And I was listening to something this morning. I was like, that's real, because I see it. I don't like, I'm not OCD per se, but I like things clean and neat. And my oldest son, he's washing the sheets every 4 days, like on routine. My youngest son is like, wash my sheets for what? I'll do that next year. And I see the part of me and my oldest son that likes to keep things clean and tidy. Like my brother brought his wife to my house years ago when I was in high school. And he said, "Won't you come meet our alien?" And he walked in my room, and he said, "Look at this. My video games were in a Ziploc bag, neatly aligned. My closet floor, which I used to mop for some reason all the time. Everything," he said, "Look at this room. There's not a speck of dust anywhere. So this guy's weird." And I look at that, and I see that developing a little bit in my oldest son, and I see some of the other things that I didn't like. But what I would say, in terms of fatherhood being difficult, is that you don't know. Your job is to cultivate a good person.
Yeah.
And it's not just to make sure that we can show our friends their diplomas or degrees or their job. It's so that that child, male or female, your son or daughter, adopted or not, whatever, that person you're in charge of grows up to be a good person and have a happy life. That may not mean they're in the NBA. That may not mean they're millionaires. It may mean that they make $40K a year, but they're happy and they're a good and present parent if they have children.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it hard, because you don't know. It's imagine doing a math problem that the world was depending on you to get right, but you have no idea if it's going to be right until it's on the paper, until the answer's there. And that's what it is with raising children. Like, I don't know, how they would turn out.
And that's the genesis of this podcast. There is no definitive manual for being a father. Two most important things you do in life, being a spouse and being a parent. There is no training for it. There is no formula. There's no recipe. There's no magic 1, 2, 3. What worked and was very good with one child may not work on the other child. They are very, very different. And they sit at the same table, eat the same meals, listen to the same stories, get all of the same discipline, but turn out very, very differently. And as a parent, you have to be flexible and be able to do all of that. Listen, Joseph, I want to thank you for coming and being part of the podcast. You have dropped some jewels, some wisdom, some knowledge that has helped me. I'm sure it will help other fathers, especially young fathers going through situations, the whole forgiveness piece. I love that you talked about it, and there's no shame in it. I don't believe there's an ideal situation to be in to be a parent. We talk about, husband and wife together, having a child, raising a child together. But I've seen situations where that is, and it's very toxic for that child. You see more situations where the child is somewhere else, and you seem to have made some headway in being successful in parenting from a distance and up close.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well done.
And I appreciate
well
that.
Done. Well
Not
done.
Always easy, but it is worth it to any dad out there. It's always worth it to have your son and daughter look at you and see love.
Yeah.
It's always worth it.
It's always worth it. Listen, folks, thank you for listening. Please like, share, invite others to listen. The podcast is available on all of the platforms: Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.